My family forced me to take beatings for my siblings' crimes, calling it tradition. When I finally exposed my hero cop father, he manipulated the entire town into believing I was the villain. In my family, the youngest child took all the physical punishments for their siblings' mistakes. I spent ages 5 through 10 being struck for things I never did. You see, my father inherited this tradition from his military father, a decorated Vietnam veteran who ran his household like a boot camp. One person bears the burden so the unit stays strong, Dad would say, polishing his service medals every Sunday morning until they gleamed like fresh wounds. He genuinely believed he was creating unbreakable family bonds, molding us into a single organism that moved and breathed as one. My mother went along with it because she'd grown up in a similar household where the eldest daughter took everyone's beatings. It made us closer, she'd insist, her voice hollow as an empty church bell. We learned to protect each other. I had 3 older siblings, Marcus, Diana, and Gabriel. They were good kids once, but knowing I'd take their punishments transformed them into something else. Marcus started skipping school, then progressed to shoplifting. Diana would steal mom's jewelry and sell it for concert tickets. Gabriel would fail tests on purpose, drawing obscene pictures instead of answering questions. During family meetings, they'd look at me with that toxic mixture of guilt and relief swimming in their eyes as Dad reached for his belt, the leather cracking like a whip in the silent room. The rule was simple but savage. Every Sunday night at exactly 7 p.m., we had accountability hour. The living room furniture would be pushed against the walls, creating an arena. Dad would list that week's infractions while I stood in the center, barefoot on the cold hardwood floor, wearing only a thin tank top and shorts so the belt would teach its lesson properly. 1 strike for every missed curfew, 5 for every failed test, 10 for any disrespect. The beating continued until Dad felt family honor was restored, his face red with righteous fury, veins pulsing in his temple like worms under skin. My siblings had to watch. That was part of it, teaching them through my pain. They'd sit on the couch in age order, hands folded in their laps, eyes forward. Mom would count the strikes out loud to make sure Dad didn't go over the prescribed amount. 1 for Marcus's tardiness, 2, 3, 4 for Diana's backtalk, 5, 6. As if her arithmetic made it medicine instead of torture. By age 7, I developed a constant flinch, my body perpetually braced for impact. Teachers noticed, but Dad was a respected police officer with commendations covering his office wall. Who'd believe me? I kept a hidden calendar under my mattress, marking which sibling caused each scar with colored pencils. Red for Marcus, purple for Diana, green for Gabriel. My body became a map of their faults. Marcus's shoplifting phase left 3 parallel marks on my back that looked like claw marks. Diana's secret boyfriend cost me a split lip that took 2 weeks to heal. I told everyone I'd fallen off my bike. Gabriel's pranks meant I couldn't sit properly for a week, shifting constantly in my desk chair while classmates snickered. The breaking point came on my 10th birthday, February 15th, a day that should have meant cake and presents. Instead, Gabriel had spray-painted obscenities on the principal's car in broad daylight, laughing as security cameras captured everything. That night, as Dad unbuckled his belt with practiced efficiency, Gabriel actually laughed. "At least I don't have to deal with this," he said, lounging on the couch like he was watching Netflix instead of his baby sister's torture. I looked at my siblings. Not one of them would meet my eyes. Marcus studied his phone. Diana examined her nails. That's when I realized they'd stopped seeing me as their sister. I was just their punishment proxy, a thing that absorbed pain so they could live freely. That night, I did something I'd never done before. When Dad raised his belt, the buckle glinting under the ceiling light, I ran. My bare feet slapped against the floor as I burst through the front door and into the February cold. I ran 3 blocks to my teacher Mrs. Lee's house, my lungs burning, wearing nothing but my punishment clothes. She opened the door to find me shivering on her porch, fresh welts rising on my arms. Without a word, she pulled me inside, wrapped me in a blanket that smelled like lavender, and made me hot chocolate while I showed her the fresh wounds and old scars. She photographed everything with clinical precision. When I told her everything, the years of abuse, the proxy system, my father's twisted concept of family honor, she called CPS immediately, but she was smart enough to know the system. "We need more than your word against a cop," she said, her kind eyes hard with determination. "We need evidence they can't ignore or explain away." So we got creative. Mrs. Lee gave me a tiny voice recorder, no bigger than a USB drive, to hide in my sock. For 3 weeks, I became a spy in my own home. I documented everything. Dad's rants about family honor and military discipline. Mom counting strikes out loud like some sick lullaby. My siblings discussing whose turn it was to mess up next. I even recorded Gabriel asking Marcus, "Think she'll cry this time?" She didn't last week. Maybe Dad's going soft. But when CPS showed up, Dad was ready. He pulled out documents showing my recent psychological evaluation, scheduled just 2 weeks prior. The timing wasn't coincidental. Dad had been preparing for this moment, building his case methodically. The CPS worker, a tired-looking woman named Catherine, accepted the paperwork with practiced neutrality. Her eyes scanned the pages while Dad launched into his performance. His voice cracked at just the right moments as he described my troubling behavior patterns and attention-seeking tendencies. He mentioned the goldfish incident from 3 years ago, how I'd supposedly overreacted to its death. Mom nodded along, adding details about my dramatic episodes whenever Dad paused for effect. They'd rehearsed this routine, I realized. Every gesture calculated, every word chosen for maximum impact. Catherine asked to speak with me privately. Dad's hand moved to his service weapon, a subtle reminder of his authority. He insisted on staying, citing safety concerns. His fingers drummed against the holster, while explaining how I'd become increasingly aggressive toward my siblings. The lies flowed smoothly, each one building on the last until they formed an impenetrable wall. Marcus walked through the door right then, holding college housing forms that needed Dad's signature. His eyes found mine across the room, and for a moment, I saw something flicker there. Doubt, guilt, but then Dad called him over, asking him to share his concerns about my behavior. Marcus glanced at the forms in his hand, his college dreams hanging in the balance. His testimony came out stilted but damaging. He described my mood swings and false accusations while carefully avoiding my gaze. The fresh welts on my back throbbed beneath my shirt. I could show them, end this charade immediately. But Dad's eyes promised consequences, not just for me, but for Marcus too. His scholarship, his future, everything hung on this moment. I kept my mouth shut, letting the evidence stay hidden while Dad spun his web of deception. Catherine took notes, her pen scratching across the paper as Dad served coffee and played the concerned father. He even pulled out photo albums, showing happier times when his system of control hadn't yet broken us completely. The doorbell rang, Mrs. Lee's distinctive pattern, but Mom intercepted it. Her phone buzzed with a supposed emergency about Diana at school, another orchestrated distraction. Gabriel arrived home to find the living room transformed into Dad's stage. Without prompting, he backed up every lie, adding his own embellishments about my jealousy and need for attention. The recorder in my sock felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Evidence of their conspiracy sat in my bedroom, just up the stairs, but leaving now would look like running away, like guilt. Catherine observed my flinching flinching when Dad moved too quickly, but she interpreted it wrong. She saw mental instability where abuse existed. Her camera came out, documenting my concerning behavior for her report. Each photo would support Dad's narrative of a troubled child rather than an abused one. The system designed to protect me was being weaponized against me. School became another battlefield. My counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, suddenly grew distant after Dad offered to write her husband a glowing recommendation for the police academy. Her previous concern evaporated, replaced by suggestions that I should focus on my studies rather than creating drama. The assistant principal started documenting my disruptions, though I'd done nothing different than before. Mom's campaign expanded beyond our house. She told concerned neighbors about my supposed phases, comparing this to when our goldfish died. Mrs. Patterson from next door stopped making eye contact during her morning walks. The grocery store clerk who'd always been friendly now hurried through our transactions. Our family's crisis had become town gossip, with me painted as the problem child terrorizing a devoted police family. The family group chat became evidence against me. My siblings screenshotted messages where I'd expressed frustration, removing context to make me seem unstable. A text saying, "I can't take this anymore after a beating," became proof of my mental health crisis. Diana posted about our family drama on her Finsta, carefully documenting my episodes for months without my knowledge. Mrs. Lee's after-school check-ins drew unwanted attention. An anonymous complaint reached the principal about her inappropriate interest in a student. She faced questions about professional boundaries while Dad played the concerned parent worried about outside influences on his troubled child. The one adult who believed me was being systematically discredited. Dad's control extended to every aspect of my life. He scheduled me for psychological evaluation with Dr. Hartman, his poker buddy. The appointment card stuck to our fridge with a magnet, a daily reminder of his power. Insurance forms required his signature. School permissions needed his approval. Every system meant to help children had a backdoor for a respected cop to walk through. Exhaustion became my constant companion. I dozed off in history class, jerking awake to find Mr. Chen documenting the incident. Potential substance abuse appeared in my permanent record. Another brick in the wall Dad was building around me. My grades slipped as I spent more energy surviving than studying, which only reinforced the narrative of a troubled child spiraling out of control. Uncle Tony had offered refuge once. He'd pulled me aside at Christmas, saying his door was always open if I needed somewhere safe. But when I called, his voice came through strained and apologetic. Dad had mentioned Tony's expired green card during a friendly conversation. The threat was clear. Help me and face deportation. Tony had his own family to protect. Another ally lost to Dad's strategic pressure. The town turned against me in small ways. Whispers followed me through the cereal aisle at Kroger. Parents pulled their children closer when I passed. The narrative had taken hold. Unstable child of a hero cop, making wild accusations for attention. Even kids at school started repeating things they'd overheard at dinner tables. My mom says she's going through something, became the polite way of dismissing my reality. Dad's lies grew more sophisticated. He claimed I'd been out past curfew the night before, but Gabriel's Instagram story from that exact time showed Dad at home, contradicting his timeline. Small victories felt hollow when the larger war was being lost. Proving one lie just made me look manipulative, like I was keeping track of details to craft my own false narrative. My best friend Emma's mom needed Dad's help getting a restraining order against her ex-husband. Suddenly, Emma wasn't allowed to hang out anymore. Her apologetic texts came less frequently until they stopped altogether. Another connection severed. Another witness silenced through strategic favors and implied threats. The truth became a liability. When I proved Dad had lied about one detail, it revealed I'd snuck out 3 months earlier to avoid a beating. My credibility crumbled as Dad reframed every escape attempt as delinquency. Mrs. Lee's celebration hug after getting the court date postponed was photographed by someone and submitted as evidence of inappropriate boundaries between teacher and student. Dinner became a performance. Dad would grip my shoulder while talking about getting through this together as a family, his fingers finding the exact spots that hurt most. His words sounded supportive to anyone listening, but the bruises they left told the real story. Mom would serve my favorite foods while discussing treatment options for my behavioral issues, as if pasta could fix what they'd broken. The recorder captured it all, but retrieving it meant risking everything. Dad had started checking my room randomly, claiming concern about self-harm materials or substance paraphernalia. The evidence that could save me sat in a shoebox beneath old drawings, close enough to touch but too dangerous to reach. Each day that passed made the recordings more valuable and more impossible to access. Catherine's report would come soon. The CPS worker had left with pages of notes supporting Dad's version of events, photos of my flinching, testimony from my siblings, school records showing declining grades and that one dozed-off incident, a paper trail of a troubled child acting out rather than a desperate kid trying to survive. The system had been turned inside out, protecting the abuser while preparing to further punish the victim. Mrs. Lee faced her own battles. The administration questioned her judgment, her professionalism, her motives. She couldn't contact me directly anymore. All communication filtered through official channels that Dad could monitor. The woman who'd wrapped me in a lavender-scented blanket that cold February night was being pushed out of my life by the very system she'd tried to use to save me. My siblings avoided me at home, guilty consciences making them cruel. Marcus buried himself in college prep. Diana spent more time with friends. Gabriel treated the whole situation like a joke, making comments about crazy little sisters when his friends visited. They'd chosen their side, and it wasn't mine. The family unit Dad claimed to be protecting had shattered, held together only by shared complicity in my abuse. The town had made its judgment. The respected cop with commendations covering his wall couldn't possibly be what I claimed. His troubled youngest child, however, fit perfectly into a narrative they could understand. Mental health issues, attention-seeking behavior, false accusations born from jealousy or delusion. The truth was too uncomfortable, so they chose the comfortable lie. Each day brought new indignities, new proofs of my supposed instability. Each night brought the knowledge that evidence of the truth sat just upstairs, in a shoebox I couldn't safely reach. The recorder held their voices, their admissions, their casual cruelty. But getting it meant risking everything, and Dad's random room searches had increased. He was suspicious, careful, always one step ahead. The walls closed in steadily. Support systems crumbled. Allies disappeared. The narrative solidified around me like concrete, trapping me in a story where I was the villain in my own abuse. Dad's system had evolved from physical control to something far more sophisticated. He'd turned the entire town into his accomplices, made them willing participants in silencing his victim. Dad's basketball coaching started the following week. Gabriel's team practiced in the school gym every Tuesday and Thursday, and Dad arrived with his whistle and clipboard like he'd been doing it for years. I watched from the bleachers as he demonstrated proper shooting form, his movements fluid and confident. The kids gravitated toward him immediately, drawn by his easy charm and genuine enthusiasm. He learned their names within minutes, remembered their favorite NBA players, even quoted lines from Space Jam when they made good plays. My favorite movie, the one we used to watch together on lazy Saturday afternoons, afternoons before everything went wrong. The irony burned like acid in my throat. Here was the man who'd turned family into warfare, teaching teamwork and sportsmanship to 12-year-olds. He high-fived them after successful drills, offered encouragement when they struggled, never once raising his voice in anger. The other parents beamed from the sidelines, thrilled that Officer Thompson had volunteered his time. They had no idea that same hand delivering praise had delivered pain just days before. Gabriel thrived under Dad's coaching, his natural athleticism finally given proper direction. He started making more shots, passing better, even helping younger players with their form. Dad would ruffle his hair after good plays, the gesture so normal and fatherly that my stomach churned. The team started winning games they'd previously lost, and Dad became the hero of the basketball parents group chat. I tried explaining the situation to my English teacher, Mr. Robbie, during lunch one day. He listened patiently as I described the punishment system, the beatings, the way Dad had manipulated Catherine's visit. But when I mentioned Dad was coaching Gabriel's team, Mr. Robbie's expression shifted. The father has some skills at playing different roles, the supportive coach with the basketball team while being the abuser at home. It's interesting how Mr. Robbie's expression changes when he learns about the coaching. That small moment shows how the father's good deeds create doubt about the OP's story. His son played on that team too, loved Coach Thompson's practices. The conversation ended with Mr. Robbie suggesting I speak with the school counselor about my family adjustment issues. Dad's influence spread through the school like spilled ink. He volunteered for career day, showing up in full uniform to talk about community service. He joined the PTA safety committee, offering professional insights about protecting children. He even started a youth mentorship program at the station, focusing on at-risk kids who needed positive role models. Every good deed built his reputation higher, while making my accusations seem more delusional. The psychological evaluation with Dr. Hartman took place in a beige office that smelled like leather and disappointment. Dad had prepped me beforehand, his hand heavy on my shoulder as he explained the importance of being honest about my struggles. Dr. Hartman asked about my sleep patterns, my appetite, my relationships with family members. I tried steering the conversation toward the abuse, but he kept redirecting to my emotional responses, my coping mechanisms, my tendency to externalize blame. He showed me ink blots that looked like nothing but spilled paint, asked me to draw pictures of my family, had me complete questionnaires about my mood. When I mentioned the beatings, he nodded sympathetically and asked how that made me feel, never once questioning whether they'd actually happened. The session ended with him prescribing mild anxiety medication and recommending family therapy. Dad thanked him profusely, playing the concerned father perfectly. Mom's password proved easier to remember than I'd expected. Her fingers had traced out our old dog's name followed by Diana's birthday, a combination she'd probably used for years. I waited until everyone was asleep before creeping to the family computer, my heart hammering against my ribs. The browser history revealed her recent searches, and what I found made my blood run cold. Troubled teen camps in Utah, wilderness therapy programs, residential treatment facilities. She'd been researching places to send me. I ordered a book about surviving child abuse, using Mom's saved credit card information and having it shipped to school instead of home. The confirmation email went to her account, but I deleted it immediately, hoping she wouldn't notice the charge among all the others. The book arrived 3 days later, hidden inside a manila envelope. I read it during study hall, learning about trauma responses, gaslighting, documentation strategies. Knowledge became my armor against their manipulation. Diana's Finsta account shocked me when I finally found it. She'd been documenting our family drama for months, posting videos and photos with captions that painted me as an unstable attention seeker. There were clips of me flinching at sudden movements, labeled as dramatic overreactions, screenshots of our text conversations, edited to remove context, even a video of me crying after a particularly bad beating, captioned with eye roll emojis and comments about teenage hormones. Her followers, mostly kids from school, left comments agreeing with her assessment. They called me crazy, suggested I needed help, shared their own stories about difficult siblings. Diana had turned my trauma into entertainment, gathering social media sympathy while I gathered bruises. The betrayal cut deeper than any belt ever could. My attempt to record Dad using Mrs. Lee's old phone nearly ended in disaster. I'd hidden it in my backpack, activated the voice recorder during dinner, hoping to capture one of his threatening monologues, but phones weren't as quiet as professional recorders. A soft beep echoed through the kitchen just as Dad was explaining how disappointed he was in my recent behavior. His head snapped up, eyes scanning the room like a predator sensing danger. I fumbled with my backpack, pretending to look for homework while frantically trying to stop the recording. Dad stood slowly, walking around the table with deliberate steps. He asked about the sound, his voice casual but his body coiled with tension. I pulled out a math worksheet, claiming I'd been trying to use the calculator app. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes, but he let it go, for now. The next morning, he announced new phone rules. All devices would be turned in before dinner, stored in a basket in his room overnight. For our safety, he explained, to prevent cyberbullying and ensure proper sleep. Mom agreed immediately, praising his proactive parenting. My siblings grumbled but complied, knowing resistance would only make things worse. Another avenue of documentation closed off. School pickup procedures changed without warning. The office secretary called me down during math class, explaining that Dad had updated my emergency contact information. He was now the only authorized person for early dismissal, medical emergencies, or any situation requiring parental involvement. Mrs. Lee's name had been removed from all forms. The secretary smiled as she explained this, clearly seeing it as a father taking appropriate responsibility for his troubled child. The nurse who'd noticed bruises on my arms during a routine health screening made her choice clear through silence. Mrs. Bobby had always been kind, offering ice packs for injuries and asking gentle questions about how I'd gotten hurt. But after her husband's construction company lost a lucrative contract with the police department, her concern evaporated. She still documented injuries as required, but her reports now included phrases like claims to bruise easily and stories inconsistent with injury patterns. I finally retrieved the recorder from my bedroom during one of Dad's community policing events. My hands shook as I pulled the shoebox from beneath old drawings and report cards. The device was still there, innocuous and powerful. I pressed play with trembling fingers, hearing 2 weeks of family conversations pour through the tiny speaker. Dad discussing strategy with Mom, Gabriel laughing about my punishments, Diana complaining about the attention I was getting, evidence of conspiracy, captured in digital clarity. But there was more. The recorder had caught Dad practicing his CPS interview responses with Mom, rehearsing answers about my behavioral problems and their concerns for my mental health. He'd even practiced emotional breaks, deciding where his voice should crack for maximum impact. Mom had offered suggestions, refining his performance like a director coaching an actor. They'd known Catherine was coming before she'd even been assigned to our case. The recording also revealed Dad's own struggles. Late at night, after everyone else had gone to bed, he'd sat in the living room talking to himself, or maybe to his deceased father. It was hard to tell. He spoke about carrying on traditions, about strength through discipline, about breaking weak links to forge stronger chains. His voice carried pain pain I'd never heard before, a rawness that suggested wounds far deeper than any he'd inflicted on me. I realized Mom kept her own records in a recipe box above the refrigerator. She'd pulled it down one evening while Dad was on patrol, flipping through index cards with dated entries. I couldn't see what she'd written, but her face had crumpled as she read, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She'd quickly returned the box when she heard Dad's car in the driveway, composing herself before he walked through the door. Grandma arrived for her monthly visit carrying her usual batch of cookies and complicated emotions. She'd always been Dad's biggest supporter, praising his dedication to family and tradition, but something had shifted in her expression when she saw me, a flicker of recognition that suggested she knew more than she let on. During dinner, she kept glancing between Dad and me, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. I cornered her while she was doing dishes, everyone else distracted by a football game. I showed her the bruises on my arms, the ones shaped like Dad's fingers, her hands stilled in the soapy water, and for a moment I thought she might actually help. But then she dried her hands carefully, cupped my face with surprising gentleness, and told me that Dad would never let her see any of us again if she interfered. Her choice was clear: neutrality that felt like betrayal. Gabriel's guilt became a weapon I learned to wield. I started forgiving him for things before he even apologized, offering understanding smiles when he expected anger. The confusion in his eyes gave me openings. During one of his vulnerable moments, I asked to borrow his phone to check Instagram, claiming mine was dead. He handed it over without question, the password already entered. His camera roll revealed more than I'd expected. Videos of family dinners where Dad's threats were barely concealed. Photos of my bruises he'd taken secretly, perhaps out of guilt or morbid curiosity. Even a few recordings of accountability hour, shot from the stairway when he was supposed to be in his room. Gabriel had been documenting too, though I couldn't tell if it was for evidence or entertainment. I accidentally encountered Dad's partner, Officer McCatherine, at the coffee shop where cops got free refills. He was sitting alone, scrolling through his phone with the exhausted expression of someone who'd seen too much. I ordered hot chocolate and chose the table next to his, making small talk about the weather while memorizing every detail of his demeanor. He seemed uncomfortable when I mentioned Dad, shifting in his seat and changing the subject to safer topics. The conversation revealed cracks in blue solidarity. Officer McCatherine mentioned how some guys at the station had been asking questions about Dad's home life. Nothing official, just water cooler concerns about stress levels and family dynamics. He quickly backpedaled, assuring me that everyone supported Dad, but the damage was done. Doubt had crept into the ranks. Marcus slipped me something during passing period, pressing a folded paper into my hand before disappearing into the crowd. I unfolded it in the bathroom, finding a printed copy of his college essay. The title alone made my throat tight. Watching Injustice, a personal reflection on family dynamics. He'd written about our household, about witnessing systemic unfairness, about the moral injury of benefiting from another's suffering. He'd changed names and details, but the truth bled through every carefully crafted sentence. The essay was beautiful and damning. Marcus had captured the complexity of our situation with nuance I didn't know he possessed. He wrote about the guilt that ate at him, the way privilege felt like poison when it came at such a cost. He'd even included a section about breaking cycles, about choosing integrity over comfort. His conclusion promised to use his education to help others escape similar situations. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever receive. Mom's estranged sister Catherine emerged from years of silence with a phone call that sent Dad into a controlled fury. Aunt Catherine lived 2 states away, had cut contact with Mom over some ancient disagreement about their father's estate, but somehow she'd heard about our situation, possibly through social media or small-town gossip networks. She offered to take temporary custody, to provide a stable environment while things got sorted out. Dad's response was swift and calculated. He filed preemptive paperwork claiming Aunt Catherine was attempting to alienate me from my loving family. He dug up old court records from her messy divorce, highlighted her history of depression, questioned her fitness as a guardian. The legal maneuvering meant I missed a mandated therapy session while meeting with lawyers, which got marked as non-compliance in my file. Every move toward freedom came with built-in penalties. Mrs. Lee's financial situation deteriorated rapidly. Legal fees drained her savings, maxed out credit cards she'd kept for emergencies. She'd hired the best family lawyer she could afford, but Dad had the police union's legal fund backing him. The disparity in resources showed during every meeting. His team arrived with boxes of documents, expert witnesses, professional presentations. Mrs. Lee's lawyer did his best with limited funds, but passion couldn't overcome financial reality. The confrontation at my favorite pizza place started innocently enough. I'd gone there seeking normalcy, craving the comfort of greasy cheese and arcade games. But Dad arrived with Gabriel's basketball team, celebrating their latest victory. The moment our eyes met across the crowded restaurant, the atmosphere shifted. Dad's jovial mask slipped for just a second, revealing something darker underneath. He approached my table with false concern, asking loudly if I was supposed to be there unsupervised. The teenage workers watched nervously as he questioned whether I'd taken my medication, if I'd informed my guardian of my whereabouts. His performance drew attention from other patrons, whispers spreading like wildfire. When I tried to leave, he blocked my path, insisting on calling Mrs. Lee to verify I had permission to be out. The situation escalated when I attempted to push past him. He grabbed my wrist, his grip just tight enough to hurt without leaving marks. The assistant manager, a kid barely older than Marcus, didn't know what to do. Dad was a cop, a regular customer, a youth coach. I was the troubled kid everyone had heard about. When the manager finally asked Dad to let me leave, Dad released me with exaggerated concern, suggesting they call if they notice any concerning behavior. Mrs. Lee returned from administrative leave with restrictions that made her job nearly impossible. She couldn't speak to me directly, couldn't offer support beyond what any teacher would provide to any student. All communication had to go through official channels, documented and reviewed. The warmth that had defined our relationship was forced behind professional boundaries. Worse, the substitute teacher during her absence had been Dad's cousin, a woman who spent more time gathering intelligence than teaching English. I started sleeping in Mrs. Lee's laundry room without official permission. She couldn't invite me to stay. That would violate the no-contact order. But she also couldn't lock her back door, and if I happened to find my way inside during the night, well, she was a heavy sleeper. The arrangement was unspoken but understood. I'd curl up between the washer and dryer, the rhythmic tumbling of late-night loads more soothing than any lullaby. Meanwhile, Dad redecorated my bedroom as part of our family's fresh start. He painted the walls a cheerful yellow, bought new furniture, even hung motivational posters about perseverance and growth. He documented the transformation on social media, posting before and after photos with captions about creating healing spaces for troubled teens. Friends and family members commented with praise and heart emojis, celebrating his dedication to my recovery. Diana's mental health deteriorated as family pressure mounted. She started wearing long sleeves even in warm weather, hiding what I glimpsed were fresh cuts along her forearms. The self-harm wasn't for attention. She kept it carefully concealed. But during one particularly tense family dinner, her sleeve rode up as she reached for the salt. The scars were deliberate. Parallel lines that spoke of control sought through pain. She cornered me in the bathroom later, tears streaming down her face as she blamed me for mom's anxiety, dad's anger, the family's destruction. She showed me more scars, some fresh, others healing into raised white lines. Each one, she claimed, was my fault. If I just kept quiet, maintained the family balance, none of this would be happening. Her pain was real, even if her blame was misplaced. Another casualty of dad's war. Mrs. Lee's investigation triggered a domino effect of consequences. Mrs. O'Catherine, who taught next door, had suspected abuse but never reported it. When the administration discovered her failure to follow mandatory reporting laws, she was suspended pending investigation. Her husband blamed her for risking their income, their reputation, their children's stability. Their marriage crumbled under the strain. Another relationship destroyed by proximity to our family's dysfunction. I kept recording despite the mounting collateral damage. Every conversation captured, every threat documented, even as innocent people suffered from the fallout. The guilt ate at me, but stopping felt like surrender. I told myself that breaking the cycle required sacrifices, that short-term pain would prevent long-term suffering. But watching Mrs. O'Catherine pack up her classroom while her daughter asked why mommy was in trouble, I wondered if I was becoming like dad, justifying harm for a greater good. Gabriel found me alone one afternoon, his usual bravado replaced by genuine confusion. He asked if I was remembering things worse than they actually were, if trauma had distorted my perception of events. The question hit harder than any belt ever had. For a moment I couldn't answer, my certainty wavering under his earnest gaze. Had I exaggerated? Was my pain coloring memories with darker shades than reality warranted? But then I remembered the calendar under my mattress, the careful documentation of each beating, the scars that corresponded to specific dates, specific infractions, the recordings that captured their casual cruelty in digital clarity. My memories might be traumatic, but they were also true. The detail about Mrs. Lee's cousin being the substitute teacher reveals how deep the father's network runs in this town. I also noticed how Diana's self-harm adds another layer to the family damage, which made the OP question if exposing the truth is worth all this pain to others. I told Gabriel that sometimes the worst abuse was making victims question their own reality. He left more confused than before, caught between loyalty and doubt. The journalist's article appeared online the following morning, carefully worded to avoid legal issues while raising questions about our family situation. Dad read it at breakfast, his jaw clenching with each paragraph. The piece mentioned his heroism saving lives, but also noted the allegations swirling around his household. Comments poured in from readers, some defending him as a dedicated officer, others wondering if there was truth to the rumors. Dad's response was immediate and strategic. He scheduled interviews with sympathetic media outlets, bringing mom along to present a united front. They spoke about the challenges of raising a troubled teen, the strain on law enforcement families, the importance of not believing every accusation. Mom dabbed at her eyes on cue while dad's voice cracked, discussing his love for all his children. The performance was flawless. School became unbearable as classmates chose sides. Some whispered traitor when I passed in hallways. Others offered quiet support, slipping notes into my locker about their own family secrets. The basketball team rallied around Coach Thompson, wearing matching shirts to practice that read, "Blue Lives Matter." Gabriel wore his proudly, the fabric stretched across his chest like armor. I discovered Dad had been requesting dangerous assignments after each Sunday beating, a pattern the journalist had uncovered through public records. High-speed chases, substance busts, domestic violence calls. He'd volunteer for the worst shifts following accountability hour. His partner mentioned it during another chance encounter, how Dad seemed to seek punishment through risk. The revelation complicated my hatred, suggesting he suffered too, just differently. The recordings from Dad's late-night monologues revealed more than self-punishment. He'd spoken to his deceased father, begging forgiveness for being weak, for letting the family discipline slip. He'd admitted knowing he was becoming what he'd hated, trapped in cycles he couldn't break. His voice had broken, describing his own childhood, the bruises hidden under his uniform mirroring ones I hid under school clothes. Understanding his pain didn't excuse it, but it explained the machinery of our destruction. During a heated family meeting, I finally played one of the recordings. Dad's voice filled the room, discussing strategy with Mom, practicing lies for Catherine. The color drained from his face as he heard himself rehearsing emotional manipulation. Mom reached for the recorder, but I pulled it back, letting his words hang in the air like evidence at trial. Gabriel shifted uncomfortably while Diana covered her ears, unable to face their complicity played back in digital clarity. Dad's composure cracked. He slammed his fist on the table, demanding to know how I'd recorded them, when I'd become so deceptive. The irony of him calling me deceptive while listening to evidence of his lies wasn't lost on anyone. Marcus stood abruptly and left the room, his college essay still folded in my pocket. The family meeting dissolved into chaos, accusations flying like shrapnel. That night, Dad sat in his patrol car outside Mrs. Lee's house for hours. I watched from the laundry room window as he stared at the front door, his silhouette rigid with barely contained rage. Mrs. Lee called the police to report the stalking, creating the surreal situation of cops responding to a complaint about one of their own. They convinced him to leave after hushed conversations, but his presence lingered like a threat. The next morning brought consequences. Child Protective Services returned with a court order for emergency custody evaluation. Dad had filed new paperwork claiming I was being manipulated by a teacher with ulterior motives. The social worker, different from Catherine, arrived with predetermined opinions about the situation. She'd already reviewed Dad's evidence, seen the photos of my concerning behavior, read reports about my declining academic performance. I showed her the bruises, played portions of the recordings, presented my documentation with desperate precision. She took notes, but her expression remained skeptical. A troubled teen making serious accusations against a decorated officer required more than amateur evidence. She questioned why I'd waited so long to come forward, why I'd recorded my family secretly, what I hoped to gain from destroying my father's reputation. Each question felt like another door closing. Marcus finally broke his silence during the social worker's family interviews. He sat rigidly in the living room chair, his college acceptance letter in his pocket like a talisman. When asked about our family dynamics, he started slowly, choosing words carefully. He described witnessing years of systematic abuse, the guilt of benefiting from my suffering, the moral injury of staying silent. His testimony carried weight mine couldn't, the privileged son confirming the scapegoat's truth. Dad's face transformed as Marcus spoke, cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been grief. He tried interrupting, claiming Marcus was confused, had been influenced by my lies. But Marcus pulled out his phone, showing videos he'd taken secretly over the years. Gabriel crying after causing a beating, me trying to hide welts before school, Mom counting strikes with mechanical precision. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Diana's reaction was explosive. She accused Marcus of betraying the family, of destroying their future for my attention-seeking drama. She pulled up her sleeves, showing her scars like evidence of my crimes. The social worker documented everything, the self-harm, the family fractures, the competing narratives of abuse and loyalty. Our family's destruction courtroom played out like a tragedy she'd seen too many times before. The police department launched an internal investigation, more concerned about liability than justice. Officers who'd supported Dad distanced themselves, suddenly remembering concerns they'd never voiced. His partner admitted to suspecting something was wrong, but choosing the thin blue line over a child's safety. The union provided lawyers, but their enthusiasm waned as evidence mounted. Dad's carefully built reputation crumbled like ancient architecture. I moved between Mrs. Lee's house and emergency foster placements while the legal system ground forward. Court dates were set and postponed. Lawyers filed motions and counter motions. The recorder evidence was challenged, authenticated, challenged again. My life existed in legal limbo, each day bringing new documents to sign, new testimonies to give, new evaluations to endure. The financial strain showed on everyone. Dad's legal defense drained their savings. Mom sold jewelry to pay lawyers. Marcus's college fund became attorney fees. Diana got a part-time job, her earnings going to family expenses instead of concert tickets. Even Gabriel contributed, mowing lawns and washing cars. The abuse that had bound us in dysfunction now bound us in financial ruin. Mrs. Lee's dedication never wavered despite the mounting costs. She attended every court hearing, documented every interaction, fought restrictions on our communication. Her savings depleted, she borrowed against her retirement, took a second job tutoring. Other teachers quietly contributed to a fund for her legal expenses, understanding that standing up for a student meant risking everything. The preliminary hearing arrived with the weight of finality. The courthouse filled with divided supporters, police union members on one side, teachers and child advocates on the other. I testified for hours, recounting years of abuse with clinical detail. The defense attorney tried painting me as vindictive, manipulative, attention-seeking, but the recording spoke louder than their character assassination. Dad testified last, his uniform pressed perfectly, medals gleaming under fluorescent lights. He admitted to physical discipline but denied abuse, claiming everything was within legal parental rights. He spoke about tradition, discipline, family honor, but when prosecutors played his recorded admissions about becoming his father, about knowing he'd gone too far, his justifications crumbled. He looked smaller without his carefully constructed narrative protecting him. The judge's decision came down to interpretation of evidence and credibility. She acknowledged the family's dysfunction, the clear pattern of physical punishment, the psychological manipulation, but she also noted the complicated dynamics, the lack of severe physical injury, the questions about my motivations. Her ruling was mixed. Dad would face criminal charges for assault, but lesser ones than prosecutors sought. Family court would determine custody separately. Mom chose Dad. Despite everything revealed, she stood by him at the sentencing, her hand in his as the judge read the verdict. 2 years probation, mandatory counseling, loss of custody, but not parental rights. The police department suspended him pending internal review. His career survived but diminished, relegated to desk duty and administrative tasks. The hero cop became a cautionary tale whispered about in break rooms. Diana went to live with Mom's cousin temporarily, needing distance from the chaos. Her self-harm escalated before stabilizing with proper therapy. She sent me a letter months later, not apologizing but acknowledging the pain we'd both endured differently. Gabriel stayed with Dad and Mom, too young for other options, but social services monitored closely. His basketball success continued, but the joy had dimmed, complicated by everything surrounding his coach. Marcus chose independence, working multiple jobs to afford a studio apartment near college. He visited me occasionally, our relationship forever changed by his late courage. We didn't discuss the years of silence, the price I'd paid for his privilege. Some wounds went too deep for words, but he showed up, and that meant something in its own broken way. The adoption process with Mrs. Lee faced bureaucratic obstacles and financial strain. Background checks, home studies, legal requirements, each step cost money she didn't have. The community that had whispered about our drama stepped up differently now, organizing fundraisers and writing character references. Former students shared stories of her dedication. Parents who doubted came forward with support. The woman who'd opened her door on a freezing February night finally became my legal guardian through sheer determination. I started therapy with someone who specialized in family trauma, learning to process years of abuse without the constant crisis of survival mode. The flinching decreased gradually. Sleep came easier. Trust rebuilt slowly, like reconstructing shattered glass. Some days felt impossible, the weight of everything crushing. Other days brought glimpses of who I might become without fear defining every moment. 6 months after the court ruling, I stood before a small audience at a local community center. Mrs. Lee had encouraged me to share my story with other survivors, to transform pain into purpose. My voice shook at first, words catching on memories. But as I spoke about breaking cycles, about choosing courage over comfort, about the price of silence and the cost of truth, strength emerged from vulnerability. The flinch was fading, replaced by something steadier. Dad completed his mandated therapy sessions, sending letters I didn't open. Mom attempted reconciliation through relatives, messages I deleted unread. The family we'd been was gone, replaced by something fractured, but perhaps more honest. Gabriel sent a birthday card with no return address. Diana posted about healing on social media, carefully avoiding mention of why she needed it. Marcus graduated with honors, his essay about injustice winning awards he dedicated to unnamed victims. Mrs. Lee officially adopted me on a Thursday afternoon in a small courtroom with 5 witnesses. No media attention, no dramatic speeches, just legal documents making permanent what love had already established. We went for pizza afterward at the place where Dad had grabbed my wrist, reclaiming spaces trauma had stolen. The teenage manager recognized me, offering a quiet smile and free breadsticks. Small victories in ordinary moments. The town moved on to new scandals, our family's destruction becoming yesterday's gossip. Dad returned to limited duty, his reputation forever tarnished, but his badge intact. Mom found work at a medical clinic, rebuilding finances slowly. The house where Accountability Hour had ruled Sunday nights was sold, the proceeds divided by lawyers. Another family moved in, unaware of the history embedded in hardwood floors. I spoke at 3 more survivor events over the following months, each time with steadier voice and clearer purpose. No fame or recognition, just small rooms of people who understood the weight of family secrets. Mrs. Lee sat in the back row each time, her presence a reminder that one person believing you can change everything. The cycle that had trapped generations was broken, imperfectly, but definitively. My 18th birthday arrived without fanfare or family gatherings. Mrs. Lee made my favorite dinner while I completed college applications, checking boxes for first-generation student and independent status. The scholarship essays wrote themselves. Overcoming adversity had become my expertise. Marcus texted that day, just 3 words that acknowledged everything without saying it. Diana sent nothing. Gabriel was playing basketball somewhere, perhaps still confused about loyalty and love. The future stretched ahead uncertain but mine to shape. Trauma would always be part of my story, but no longer its only chapter. Mrs. Lee helped me pack for college orientation, folding clothes into boxes while discussing meal plans and class schedules. Normal conversations that felt revolutionary after years of survival mode. We didn't talk about the past that day. today, focused instead on possibilities ahead. As I loaded the car for the drive to campus, I found the old calendar from under my mattress, the one marking punishments in colored pencil. Red for Marcus, purple for Diana, green for Gabriel. I thought about burning it, dramatic closure for a difficult chapter. Instead, I tucked it into a filing box with court documents and therapy notes. Evidence of what was, reminders of why forward was the only direction left. The road to college led past the courthouse, the police station, the pizza place, the grocery store where whispers had followed me. Each landmark held memories I was leaving without abandoning. Mrs. Lee drove steadily, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand when difficult intersections approached. We didn't need words anymore, understanding flowing between us like shared breath. At the dormitory, she helped me carry boxes to a small room I'd share with a stranger who knew nothing about proxy punishments or family court. My new beginning came without explanations or apologies, just the simple act of unpacking belongings into spaces trauma hadn't touched. Mrs. Lee hugged me goodbye in the parking lot, both of us crying without shame. She'd saved me in ways that went beyond testimony and legal fees. That night in my dorm room, I lay awake without flinching at unexpected sounds. My roommate snored softly across the room, unaware of the small miracle of my stillness. Somewhere, Dad was probably polishing his tarnished metals, Mom counting something other than strikes, my siblings navigating their own versions of aftermath. But I was here, 18 and alive, proof that cycles can break even when the breaking feels like dying. The next morning brought new routines without violence. Breakfast in a crowded dining hall, students complaining about early classes and weekend plans. I sat among them carrying invisible scars but no longer defined by them. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Lee, just heart emojis and encouragement. I replied with a photo of my first college sunrise, light breaking over buildings where my future waited, unwritten, and finally mine. This is the end of the video, but I noticed how the OP gives each family member their own way of dealing with what happened: Gabriel's unsigned card, Diana's careful social media posts, and Marcus's essay that wins awards while keeping the real story hidden. I loved reading through this one, and I hope you guys will join me for the next one.